Our agenda is under old business, and that is a discussion with regard to a town meeting warrant article to ban polystyrene and the potential impact on the school department. By way of background, citizen petitioners have requested that an article be placed on the annual town meeting warrant, which of course it is on the warrant, that prohibits the dispensing of prepared food in disposable food service containers made from expanded polystyrene in Shrewsbury. At our previous school committee meeting on May 9th, we received two presentations, one from Mr. Collins and Ms. Nichols, to give a presentation on the potential impact that the passage of this warrant article would have on the school department. We also received a presentation from the petitioners to explain their advocacy on behalf of the polystyrene ban. We further held a public hearing on this topic and received feedback from members of the community. Since that time, leading up to tonight's meeting, we have continued to receive feedback via email from members of the community on this topic, and I'll pause here just to express my and our thanks to members of the community who offered their feedback on this topic. We heard quite a bit about this issue on both sides from members of the community, so I do want to thank everyone who took the time to express their views to us. At this time, I do want to open this up to a discussion of school committee members now that we've had time to process this information, see where people are living. There are a number of issues before us as the warrant article itself. There's Styrofoam and its presence in Shrewsbury Public Schools, so at this time I'm going to turn it over to committee members for discussion. Dr. McGee.
So this is complicated, and I would say that if the proposal was just, we'd like to cut down waste, we'd like to cut down litter in Shrewsbury, we'd like to move to reusable trays and utensils and everything in the schools, and the schools already had the necessary equipment and everything, I'd be on board for that. I like the idea of having reusables. I like the idea of having of not throwing things away after a single use, and that appeals to me a lot. When we have other elements in there and I try to look at them, it becomes a little more foggy for me. There were issues brought up regarding the health risks of polystyrene, and I've looked at the medical literature. I've tried to look at various institutional websites with regard to the evidence that they have and the pronouncements that they've made. I've initiated contact with the Massachusetts Department of Public Health. Haven't gotten a clear answer yet from them, but I will follow through on that. But I'm attempting to gather the information that I can. And having been exposed to the medical literature for over 40 years, I come to appreciate the fact that suggestive isn't the same as cause. That if one organization says that they support a particular position, it does not necessarily mean that all organizations do. And that some increase in risk, particularly depending on the means of surveying the population and the level of risk we're talking about, may turn out in the long run to not be an increase at all. I could spend the rest of our meeting just talking about good ideas that turned out to be not such good ideas over the long run. And at this point in time, I haven't found convincing evidence that there is a significant health risk associated with using the polystyrene. And so those who feel that that is a major issue here, I'm just not convinced of it at this time. I will continue to look into it because I'm certainly interested. The other piece of this has to do with pollution and whether we are generating a pollutant with the polystyrene. And combusted materials, particularly if it's very hot, over 1,000 degrees, what we end up with is overwhelmingly CO2 and water with regard to combusting polystyrene. And as you know, we use that to generate energy. But the other part of this equation is that we may not have as an alternative going to washable trays and washable anything. We may have as an alternative going to compostable materials, which we heard are going to increase costs a little bit, but not a lot. And the other part of that, which wasn't modeled into the scenario, if I understand it correctly, was that if they're compostable materials, we need a compost heap. We need to have trucks pick those up and dump them in the Shrewsbury compost heap or however that is going to be done. We would be depending upon the town government to generate that sort of facility and that sort of service, which would add additional costs, but also is another variable that may not get passed. we may decide to use combustible materials and they get thrown in the garbage and they get sent off and burned. And the net density of those materials is substantially greater than that of polystyrene. So it may end up being that we're generating more CO2 burning these combustible materials than we would have by burning polystyrene. It is not clear to me at all on that one. But by the same token, I really like the idea of cutting down waste. I like the idea of not throwing something away after a single use. And I would be very supportive of the notion of trying to use reusable materials to try to conserve and generate less waste. So I'm in the middle here, and in the end I'm going to have to, as a town meeting member, vote yes or no. But I don't want to sort of generate a strong argument by taking a bunch of areas that are sort of questionable and turning them into something that reflects certainty that I don't think exists at this time.
Mr. Wensky.
Yeah, I'm riding the fence too, just to be honest about this. Last week, one of my main concerns was cost and the impact to the operation. It's still a valid concern. This is a self-funded service, right? So it's funded through the fees collected through the services provided to 6,100 students, right, over lunches that span 25 minutes on average. So, there's some concerns there. I want to make sure that that's not, clouded by the health concerns that were brought to our attention last week, and something that we should continue to, just consider. But certainly, I think it is a complicated issue. I don't have I'm still thinking through it, to be honest with you, but yeah, that's kind of where I'm at.
Mrs. Fritz.
Yeah, and this petition is going to be brought before the town meeting, which is the legislative body, and they will decide whether or not to ban or to, defeat the article. And if it's passed, then we will have to deal with that and figure out what that is. I don't think it's a simple answer. There's a lot to consider. Like Dr. McGee said, there's articles for pro and against, what it means, what it doesn't mean with styrene. So I think there's a lot to look at. But I think if it passes, we will have to deal with it. We have to look at it from a lot of angles, including the health angle, but also the full cost picture. It's not simple. I think passing on costs to consumers, we can't say it's minimal. We have to really look at what that full picture is. Some of it could be town costs that are really not school costs. So is it going to be something that we're going to have to take the full for? Is it going to be something the town is taking the cost? So there's a lot to look at. And if it doesn't pass, I think we can then talk about it as a committee. Is it something we should look at as a policy and really put time and effort in? So I think waiting for town meeting to see what happens. We're all town meeting members. We will all vote on it at town meeting. But as far as as a school committee, I think we have to wait and see what the legislative body decides first.
Mrs. Canzano.
Yeah, I think because the warrant article impacts the entire town, not just the school department, I'm totally comfortable waiting until after town meeting to figure out what our next steps might be. I think it might be helpful if we gave the chair some opportunity to express some of the impacts that Patrick Collins and Beth Nichols brought before us, just in case there is there are questions for the school committee. So I would propose something like that. I'm going in, I think, to town meeting leaning towards a ban. That's my environmental feeling about it, but I'm still, you raised a lot of issues that still have to be figured out. I'm looking forward to a very healthy and vigorous debate on Monday or Wednesday, whenever we get to it in the article. But I will say that the students were very persuasive in some areas that have caused me to do a lot of deep thinking on this issue.
So thank you, colleagues. My personal opinions on this as an individual committee member, I'm not sitting on the fence. I was torn in half by it. I see before us two distinctly separate questions that both merit our addressing. The first is a specific warrant article, a specific article with specific language that's going to come before town meeting next week. But then I also see the issue of Styrofoam. And whatever we think of the warrant article, we are significant purchasers of Styrofoam. Where I come down on the warrant article is I don't feel it is appropriate for this committee to take a formal position on it, for the simple reason being that while I know the petitioners have expressed at various points that they did intend for the warrant article to come at Shrewsbury Public Schools, it is not specific to Shrewsbury Public Schools. It involves retail businesses in the entire community, and this committee, it is not the province of school committee to tell retail businesses what to do. This committee does not have a precedent of doing that. We did not weigh in on the plastic bag ban. We did not weigh in on recreational marijuana. And for those reasons, I do not consider it appropriate for us to now assume the mantle of weighing in on something of that nature. Having said that, I also recognize that of all of the entities in town government, we, as Shrewsbury Public Schools, we are the ones who are purchasing Styrofoam. And as an individual committee member, as an individual town meeting member, as an individual resident, I would like to see us, as Shrewsbury Public Schools, over time, gradually move away from the purchasing of Styrofoam, simply because I do not want us to be supportive of that market. It isn't something that I feel is an emergency need. I am loath to pass on food costs to students because I know that those dollar amounts seem low. I know that there's free and reduced lunch, but I also know that there are students whose nutrition in any given day is largely dependent on the nutrition they get from Shrewsbury Public Schools, so I'm loath to pass those costs on. Having said that, I also know that that marketplace is changing. We have seen that Dunkin' Donuts is going to be moving away from the use of Styrofoam, which I have to imagine is a multi-billion-dollar impact in New England. And I do know that Mr. Collins and Ms. Nichols both do a great job of keeping their eyes on the market to make sure we're getting the best value for the products that we purchase. So I, as an individual member, would encourage them to keep an eye on moving us away from that product. That's my personal opinion, and in terms of the opinions we've expressed here, we are left with the question of how to proceed to town meeting, and Mrs. Canzano made reference to one potential course of action. I will say, to the extent that town meeting members have specific questions related to the practicalities involved with getting away from Styrofoam should the ban pass, I think it would be most appropriate to defer those questions to Dr. Sawyer and to Mr. Collins with regard to how the district would adapt to those. But in terms of a policy question, I do think that there will be town meeting members who didn't have an opportunity to watch this meeting tonight who are interested in our thoughts, which are clear from this discussion to be somewhat diverse, some differing opinions here. I am getting the sense, and please object if I'm correct in this, that there is not the sense that we should take a formal position on this warrant article. Is there any agreement on that? Seeing that, I would ask my colleagues for a vote to authorize me as chair to succinctly summarize this discussion for those town meeting members who wish to know the committee's perspective on this from a policy point of view.
So moved.
Mrs. Fritz moves, Dr. McGee seconds. Is there further discussion on this? Seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? It passes. I will take it upon myself to summarize this discussion for town meeting members to the extent possible. Is there any further discussion from school committee members on this topic? Seeing none, Dr. Sawyer, anything you wanted to add to this?
No, Mr. Collins and I will, and with Mrs. Nichols' support, will provide Mr. Palich with just the information and condense what was presented at last week's meeting. I think it would be helpful if town meeting members had some of the specifics in terms of numbers of trays and costs that we're projecting, and those sorts of things, so that they can make the most informed decision at town meeting next week.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Moving on.